They said recovery would take 6 weeks. The surgeon explained this carefully, walking me through the timeline with kind, practiced patience. My son nodded along as if he were listening. I came home from the hospital to an empty house. The key stuck in the lock the way it always did, but this time I didn't have the strength to jiggle it properly. I stood on my front porch for what felt like hours, my surgical incision pulling with each shallow breath, before the mechanism finally gave. The house was dark, silent, exactly as I'd left it 4 days earlier when the ambulance came. Robert used to leave lights on when he knew I'd be coming home after dark, small things like that. The lamp by his reading chair, the one in the kitchen above the sink. He'd been gone 8 years, but I still noticed their absence. I set my overnight bag on the floor just inside the door because I couldn't carry it any farther. The pain medication they'd given me at discharge was wearing off. I could feel it ebbing away like a tide, leaving sharp awareness in its wake. The message light on the phone was blinking. I didn't check it. Instead, I made my way slowly to the kitchen, one hand pressed against my abdomen, the other trailing along the wall for balance. The refrigerator hummed its familiar complaint. Inside, milk from before the surgery, now 4 days expired. Bread in the bin, growing those first spots of green. A casserole dish Mrs. Chen from next door had brought over 2 weeks ago, still untouched because I'd been too anxious about the surgery to eat. I'd asked my son to pick up a few groceries before I came home. Just milk and bread, maybe some soup. Things that would be easy. The cabinets held crackers and tea. I managed to heat water in the kettle, though lifting it to pour made my vision swim. I sat at Robert's spot at the table. I'd stopped calling it that years ago, but it was still where he'd sat every morning for 43 years of marriage. I sipped weak tea from a chipped mug, and I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. The house settled into its evening sounds around me, the heating system kicking on, the refrigerator cycling. Outside, Mrs. Chen's dog barking at something only he could see. Normal sounds, familiar. But the silence underneath them had a weight I'd never noticed before, something that pressed against my ribs and made the surgical pain seem almost secondary. I thought about calling my son, Michael, but my phone was still in my purse by the front door, and the distance between the kitchen and the entryway might as well have been miles. I stayed where I was. Eventually the tea went cold. The room grew dark. I sat in Robert's chair and I looked at the phone on the wall, the old landline we'd installed in 1987 and I'd never bothered to remove, and I waited for it to ring. It didn't. When the pain became too much to ignore, I made my way upstairs, one step at a time, pausing on each landing. The bedroom was cold. I'd forgotten to adjust the thermostat before I left for the hospital, and no one had thought to check. I pulled back the covers, floral pattern, bought on sale at Macy's 12 years ago, still good quality. I lay down on my side, the only position that didn't make the incision scream. Sleep came in fragments. Somewhere around midnight, I heard a car in the driveway. Hope flared, bright and foolish, but the engine sound was wrong, and the headlights swept past without stopping. Mrs. Chen's son, probably. He visited on Tuesdays. The next morning, I woke to sun through the curtains and birdsong and the persistent grinding ache of healing tissue. My phone showed 3 text messages, all from the same number. "Hope surgery went well, Mum. Let us know when you're home. Kids have tournaments this weekend, crazy busy." All sent yesterday. All sent hours after I'd already been discharged and driven home by a patient hospital volunteer who'd helped me into the house and asked twice if I was sure I'd be okay alone. I'd said yes, because what else do you say? I deleted the messages without responding. The kitchen in daylight looked exactly as it had for 30 years. Same yellow curtains, same crack in the corner of the linoleum that Robert had promised to fix and never got around to fixing. Same view of Mrs. Chen's hydrangeas through the window above the sink. But standing there, leaning against the counter because my legs were shaking, I saw it differently. Saw the dust on the windowsill that I hadn't had the energy to wipe before the surgery. Saw Robert's coffee mug still in the drainer, the one with the faded "World's Best Dad" that Michael had given him 20 years ago. Saw the calendar on the wall, still turned to March, even though it was now early April. No one had turned the page. I made toast because it was something I could do standing still. The bread was stale, but not mouldy. I ate it dry, standing at the counter, and I tried not to think about how my son had known the surgery was scheduled for Tuesday, had known I'd be discharged Friday, had received the text I'd sent him from the hospital that morning saying I was on my way home. Had known and had chosen tournaments. The crumbs on my fingers felt gritty, real. I brushed them into the sink and I turned on the water and I watched them spiral down the drain. Such a simple thing, such a pointless thing to notice, but I noticed everything that day. The days blurred together in a haze of pain medication and daytime television and the slow, grinding work of healing. I learned to move differently, learned which positions made the incision pull and which gave me a few minutes of relief. Learned to sleep sitting up in Robert's recliner because lying flat was impossible. I learned to be alone. Michael called on day 3. Brief, cheerful. The kids had won their tournaments, both of them. Wasn't that great? He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He said that was good, he'd been worried. Then he said he had to run. Melissa was calling him about something. Talk soon, Mum, love you. The conversation lasted 93 seconds. I know, because I watched the call timer on my phone. Love you too, I said to the silence after he'd hung up. On day 5, a delivery arrived, flowers in a glass vase, the kind you see in hospital gift shops, carnations and baby's breath, and a card in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. Hope you feel better soon. Love, Michael, Melissa, Jake and Emma. I set the arrangement on the kitchen table. The water in the vase was already cloudy. The flowers smelled like nothing, or maybe like the chemical they used to make cheap flowers last longer than they should. I looked at the card for a long time, at the generic message, at the way she'd signed all their names in a tidy row. Hope you feel better soon, not thinking of you, not wish we could be there, just hope you feel better soon, as if I'd had a cold. As if major abdominal surgery was something you got over with positive thinking and rest. I didn't move the vase. It sat there on the table, a bright spot of colour in my peripheral vision, and every time I looked at it I felt something cold settle in my chest. Mrs. Chen came by that afternoon. She'd seen the hospital volunteer drop me off, she said. She'd been meaning to check in. She brought soup in a Tupperware container, and she didn't comment on the state of my kitchen or the fact that I was wearing the same nightgown I'd had on for 2 days. "You need anything, you call me," she said, writing her number on a post-it note and sticking it to the refrigerator, day or night. "I mean it, Helen." I thanked her. I meant it. After she left, I sat in Robert's chair and I looked at the flowers and I thought about how my son had sent them instead of coming himself, how Melissa had probably ordered them online, how Jake and Emma probably didn't even know I'd had surgery. They were 15 and 13. Old enough to understand, old enough to visit their grandmother. The silence in the house had texture now, weight. It wasn't just the absence of sound anymore, it was the absence of everything else, of someone asking if I needed water, of someone adjusting the blanket, of someone just being there, in the next room, existing in a way that meant I wasn't completely alone. Robert would have been there. Even in those last years when the cancer was eating him from the inside, he'd have found a way. He'd have sat with me, made terrible jokes, held my hand. Michael had his father's eyes. Same deep brown, same way of crinkling at the corners when he smiled. But he wasn't his father. I got up, slowly, holding my abdomen, and I walked to the phone and I picked it up and I started to dial Michael's number. My fingers knew the pattern. 7 digits I'd called 1,000 times. I hung up before it rang. What would I say? That I needed him? That I was hurt by his absence? That flowers weren't enough? That 93-second phone calls weren't enough? That I'd raised him better than this? What would be the point? I set the phone back in its cradle and I returned to the chair and I sat there. As the afternoon light moved across the floor, turning everything golden and then grey and then dark, the flowers on the table wilted slowly over the next week. The water grew thick and brown. I watched them die, and I didn't throw them away. They were evidence, I thought, proof of something, though of what exactly I couldn't quite name yet. On day 12, a Thursday, trash day, I know because I heard the trucks outside. I was sitting at the table with my tea when I heard voices in the driveway. Young voices. Jake's distinctive laugh, the one that sounded like Michael's used to before his voice changed. They'd come. I stood too quickly and the incision pulled and I had to brace myself against the counter. But they were here, finally. I could hear Emma saying something about being hungry and Jake's response too muffled to make out. I waited for the doorbell. It didn't ring. Instead, I heard car doors, an engine starting, the sound of tires on gravel fading away. I made it to the front window in time to see Michael's SUV turning onto the main road. They'd been in my driveway, close enough to walk to the door, close enough to knock. They'd been picking up something. That's what Michael had texted about 2 days ago. Could he stop by and grab Jake's baseball equipment from the garage? I'd said yes, of course. The garage code was the same as always. They'd been here 10 feet from my door, and they'd left. I stood at the window until my legs started shaking. Then I sat on the floor because it was closer than the chair, and I sat there with my back against the wall and my hands pressed against my abdomen, and I finally let myself understand what I'd been avoiding for 12 days. They didn't care. Not in the way I'd always told myself they did. Not in any way that meant showing up. Not in any way that cost them anything. The realization didn't come with tears. It came with a cold, clear certainty that settled into my bones like winter. I got up eventually, made more tea, threw away the flowers. The vase I washed and put in the cabinet, though I wasn't sure why I bothered. That night, lying in the recliner, because my bed was still too uncomfortable, I thought about money, about my will, about the power of attorney I'd signed years ago when Michael had said it was smart to have these things in place just in case. Just in case. I'd been so careful with my money. Robert's life insurance, the house paid off, my teacher's pension. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable, secure. Michael was my only child. Of course it would all go to him someday. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, and I thought about what someday meant. About what would happen to this house, to Robert's things, to the life we'd built here. About whether any of it mattered to anyone but me. I didn't call Michael to tell him about the driveway. What would be the point? He'd apologise, probably, say they were running late, that Emma had been cranky, that next time they'd stop in for sure. He'd sound sincere. He'd mean it in the moment. And then the next time would be the same. Instead, I called my bank. It took me 3 days to work up to it, 3 days of sitting with the phone in my lap, the number pulled up on the screen, my finger hovering over the dial button. 3 days of telling myself I was overreacting, that I was being unfair, that pain medication and loneliness were making me paranoid, but every time I tried to talk myself out of it, I'd remember Jake's laugh in my driveway, remember 12 days of silence, remember flowers ordered online with a generic message, remember that they'd been 10 feet away and hadn't knocked. On day 15, I called. "First National Bank, this is Cheryl. How may I help you?" My voice came out steady, surprising that. I need to make changes to my accounts. To who has access? There was a pause. Professional, practiced. Of course, Mrs. Brennan. I'll need to verify your identity and then I can connect you with our account services team. The process took 45 minutes. Security questions, account numbers, confirmation codes sent to my phone. By the end of it, Michael's name was removed from my checking account, my savings account, my investment portfolio. He'd never needed access, really. It had just seemed sensible when he'd suggested it 5 years ago, after his father died. In case of emergency, he'd said. In case you need help with anything, Mum. I'd needed help 13 days ago. The emergency had already happened. Is there anything else I can assist you with today, Mrs. Brennan? I looked at the notepad in front of me. I'd written 2 names while on hold. Arthur Klein, estate attorney. Grace Mitchell, real estate agent. Both numbers copied from the small ads in the back of the local paper, the one that still got delivered to my driveway every Thursday. No, I said. That's all. Thank you. I made the next call before I could change my mind. Klein and Associates, how may I direct your call? I need to revise my will. Another professional pause. Another transfer. Then a man's voice, warm and patient in the way of people who deal with the elderly regularly. Mrs. Brennan, I'm Arthur Klein. I understand you're interested in updating your estate documents. My son has power of attorney, I said. The words came out flat, factual. I want to revoke it. I want to change my will. I want to make sure he can't access my affairs. I see. A pause that felt different from the others, gentler. Mrs. Brennan, may I ask, is there a specific concern? Has something happened? I thought about explaining. About surgery and silence and flowers and driveways. About 12 days that had peeled back 30 years of assumptions. Yes, I said, something happened. I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Of course. Would you like to schedule a consultation? We set an appointment for the following Monday, 4 days away. He'd come to me, he said, given my recent surgery. House calls weren't standard practice, but for estate revisions he made exceptions. I thanked him and I hung up. I sat there at the kitchen table with my hands trembling and my surgical incision aching and something new blooming in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Control. Mrs. Chen came by again that weekend. She brought more soup and a knowing look. You're looking better, she said, setting the Tupperware on my counter. Moving better. I'm healing. Good. She glanced at the empty spot on the table where the flowers had been. Your son been by? No. She nodded once, didn't push. That's what I liked about her. 73 years old, widowed 6 years, and she'd learned when to speak and when to leave silence alone. My daughter tried to move me to assisted living last year, she said, washing her hands at my sink as if she did it every day. Said my house was too big, Too much for me to manage alone. I looked at her. Small woman, strong shoulders, hands that still gardened every day. What did you do? Told her no. She dried her hands on the towel hanging by the stove. Told her it was my house, my choice, my life. She didn't like it much. Does she visit? Sometimes. Mrs. Chen shrugged. On her terms, when it's convenient. But that's all right. I've got my garden, my routines, my space. That's enough. She left shortly after, but her words stayed settled into the space the flowers had left behind. My house, my choice, my life. On Monday, Arthur Klein arrived at precisely 2 o'clock. Late 60s, maybe. Silver hair. Kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather briefcase and he wiped his feet on the mat before stepping inside, even though it hadn't rained in a week. Mrs. Brennan, thank you for seeing me. I'd tidied the living room, put on real clothes for the first time in days, made tea that I didn't drink. We sat in the formal living room, the one Robert and I had furnished carefully over the years and almost never used. Arthur Klein spread documents across the coffee table and he explained things in plain language. No legal jargon, no condescension. Your current will leaves everything to your son Michael. Your power of attorney grants him full authority over your medical and financial decisions. Is that correct? Yes. And you'd like to change both? I looked at the papers, at my signature from 5 years ago, careful and trusting, at Michael's name typed in block letters. Yes. May I ask who you'd like to designate instead? I'd thought about this late at night, early in the morning, during the long afternoon hours when the pain medication made everything feel both sharp and distant at once. For medical power of attorney, I'd like to name my friend Clara Chen. She lives next door. For financial, I'd prefer to maintain control myself for now, but if necessary, I'd like it to default to a professional executor rather than families. Arthur Klein nodded, making notes. And your will? I'd like to leave most of my estate to charity. Medical research. Cancer research specifically. Robert's face, the way it looked in those last months. I'll leave Michael the photo albums and family heirlooms, but the house, the money, I want it to go somewhere it will matter. That's certainly your right. He set down his pen and looked at me directly. Mrs. Brennan, I do need to tell you that your son could potentially contest this will. He may have grounds to argue undue influence or mental incompetence, especially given your recent surgery. I understand. Do you mind if I ask, has he done something specific to warrant this change? I thought about how to answer, about whether I owed this stranger my story. He hasn't done anything, I said finally. That's the problem. He hasn't done anything at all. Arthur Klein held my gaze for a long moment, Then he nodded once as if I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "I'll draft the new documents. We'll include a statement of your mental competency, dated and witnessed. We'll make it as ironclad as possible." We spent another hour going over details, specifics, numbers. By the time he left, my head was spinning and my incision was screaming, and I felt more awake than I had in weeks. That evening, I made the third call. "Grace Mitchell Properties. This is Grace. I'd like to sell my house." Grace Mitchell arrived the next morning with a camera and a tablet and an enthusiasm that felt almost aggressive against my quiet house. She was younger than I'd expected, 40 maybe. Sharp suit, sharper smile. "Gorgeous property," she said, already taking photos of the front porch. "How long have you lived here?" 41 years. She paused mid-shot, looked at me, really looked. "That's a long time." "Yes. Are you downsizing, moving closer to family?" The questions people ask, the assumptions they make. "I'm moving to an apartment," I said. "I haven't decided where yet." We walked through the house. She photographed everything, made notes on her tablet, pointed out features that would appeal to buyers: the updated kitchen from 10 years ago, the hardwood floors under the carpeting, the large backyard with mature trees. "This should move quickly," she said. "Good neighborhood, good bones. We'll list it next week." "I'd like to list it today." Another pause, another assessing look. "Mrs. Brennan, I should mention that preparing a house for sale usually takes time. Decluttering, staging, sometimes minor repairs. We'll get the best price if we—" "I don't care about the best price," I said. "I care about selling it quickly and quietly. Can you do that?" She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I can do that." We listed it that afternoon. Grace suggested pricing it slightly below market value to generate immediate interest. I agreed. We scheduled showings to begin in 3 days. I agreed to that too. After she left, I walked through my house and I tried to see it the way a stranger would. The worn spot on the carpet where Robert used to pace while on the phone. The wall in the hallway where we'd marked Michael's height every birthday until he turned 15 and decided he was too old for that. The kitchen window where I'd stood countless mornings watching seasons change. 41 years of memories compressed into square footage and asking price. I didn't cry. I'd thought I might, but I didn't. Instead, I started packing. Not everything. Not yet. Just the things that mattered. Robert's watch, our wedding photo, the quilt my mother had made. Things small enough to fit in boxes that I could carry. The rest, the furniture, the dishes, the accumulated weight of 4 decades, I'd donate. Let someone else use Robert's tools. Let someone else cook in the pots we'd received as wedding presents. Let it all go somewhere it would be useful, instead of sitting here gathering dust, waiting for a son who wouldn't even come inside when he was in the driveway. Michael called that Thursday. I stared at his name on my phone screen, considered not answering. But old habits are hard to break, even when you're breaking everything else. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?
Better.
That's great. Listen, I wanted to ask. Melissa's birthday is next month, and she's been talking about that silver tea set of yours, the one from Grandma. I know you're probably not ready to part with it yet, but she wanted me to ask if she could maybe borrow it for a party she's planning. She'd take really good care of it. I looked at the china cabinet in the dining room, the tea set visible through the glass. Sterling silver, yes. From Robert's mother, yes. Something I'd carefully polished and displayed and never actually used because it was too precious for every day. No, I said. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, oh. Okay, that's fine. I just thought. Actually, I'm selling it, I said. I'm selling most things. I'm moving. Moving? Mum, what are you talking about? I'm selling the house. I've listed it with a realtor. Showings start this weekend. You're what? Why? Why? Such a simple question. So impossible to answer in a way he'd understand. Because it's too big for me alone. But Mum, you've lived there 40 years. You and Dad built that life there. You can't just sell it. What about all of Dad's things? What about the family memories? I almost laughed. Would have if it weren't so sad. I'll keep the photo albums, I said. You're welcome to come by before the sale closes and take anything you want. The rest is going to charity. Mum, this is crazy. You just had surgery. You're not thinking clearly. Let's talk about this when you're feeling better. Maybe you should come stay with us for a while. Let Melissa take care of you. I don't want Melissa to take care of me, I said. And then, because honesty was the only thing I had left, I wanted you to take care of me. 13 days ago, when I came home from the hospital. But you had tournaments. The silence this time had weight. Mum, I explained that. The kids had been preparing for months. I couldn't just. I know you couldn't. I did know that. Understood it even. That's why I'm selling the house. That's why I'm changing my will. That's why I called the bank and had your name removed from my accounts. You did what? I'm taking care of myself, Michael, since no one else seems inclined to do it. That's not fair. You know I'd help if you really needed it. But you said you were fine. You said I lied, I said, because that's what you wanted to hear. That's what made it easier for you. But I'm not fine, Michael. I haven't been fine. And I'm tired of pretending I am, just so you don't have to feel guilty about not showing up. I hung up before he could respond. The phone rang immediately. I turned it off. Then I went back to packing. The showing started that weekend, just as Grace had promised. Couples walked through my home with appraising eyes. They opened closets, flushed toilets, stood in the backyard and discussed whether there was enough room for a deck. I wasn't there. I stayed at Mrs. Chen's house, drinking tea in her kitchen, listening to her talk about her garden, while strangers decided the fate of my life's work. Doesn't it bother you, she asked me, letting them poke through everything? No, I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. It's just a house. It's not just a house, Helen. It's your house. It was, I corrected. It was Robert's and mine. Now it's just walls and floors and a mortgage that's been paid off for 6 years. It's not mine anymore. Maybe it never really was. Mrs. Chen looked at me over her teacup. You sound different. I feel different. The house sold in 4 days. A young couple expecting their first child. They loved the backyard, loved the mature trees, loved the marks on the hallway wall where we'd tracked Michael's growth. We'll keep those, the woman said, her hand on her belly, for our baby. It feels like good luck, you know, good energy in this house. I signed the papers without reading them carefully. Grace handled the details. Closing would be in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to dismantle 41 years. I spent those weeks methodically emptying my life, donated furniture to charity, gave Robert's clothes to a men's shelter, sorted through boxes in the attic and the basement and the garage. I kept what mattered, donated the rest. Michael didn't call again, didn't text, didn't drive by. I'd meant what I said. He'd heard that much at least. Mrs. Chen helped me pack. She didn't ask questions, didn't tell me I was making a mistake, just showed up every morning with coffee and boxes and quiet company. By the time I finished, the space felt different, not empty, open. Where are you moving? She asked on the 3rd day of packing. I found an apartment, I said. Small place by the lake, senior community. Independent living, not assisted, just different. Smaller, much smaller. 2 rooms, but the windows face the water. I can see the sunrise from the bedroom. She smiled at that. Robert would have liked that. Yes, I said, he would have. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. Small elevator, narrow hallways, nothing like the house. I signed the lease on a Tuesday morning in the building's management office. The woman processing my application was efficient and bored. She photocopied my driver's license, ran my credit, collected first month's rent and security deposit. You're all set, Mrs. Brennan. Keys are in Unit 312. Any questions? No, I said. Thank you. I moved in 3 days later. Mrs. Chen helped again. So did her son and his friend, 2 middle-aged men who carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaint. Everything I'd kept fit in their truck in 1 trip. 1 trip. 41 years reduced to a dozen boxes and some essential furniture. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's cooking. The walls were beige, the carpet was industrial, but the windows did face the water just like I'd remembered from the showing. Lake Michigan stretched out grey and endless, and in the early morning light it looked almost peaceful. I unpacked slowly, put Robert's photo on the nightstand, hung my mother's quilt on the wall in the bedroom, set out the few dishes I'd kept, enough for 1 person maybe 2 if Mrs. Chen visited. The silence here was different from the silence in the house, thinner, less oppressive. I could hear my neighbours through the walls. A television, a door closing, someone's phone ringing. Normal sounds, evidence of life continuing. That evening, I sat at my new kitchen table, a small round thing from IKEA, nothing like the solid oak that had held 41 years of family dinners, and I wrote a letter. Michael, by the time you read this, I will have sold the house and moved to a new address. I am not providing that address. I am asking you not to look for it. The house closed yesterday. After paying off the remaining expenses and fees, the proceeds have been donated to the American Cancer Society in your father's name. Your inheritance from me will consist of the photo albums I've left in a storage unit. The key and location are with Arthur Klein's office. He will contact you. I know you think I've acted impulsively, irrationally. Perhaps you're right. But I spent 2 weeks recovering from major surgery completely alone. 2 weeks in which I called you once and you called me twice. 2 weeks in which you sent flowers with a generic message and visited my driveway, but not my door. Those 2 weeks showed me something I'd been avoiding for a long time. I have spent years being taken for granted, years being the person you call when you need something, but never the person you think to check on when you don't. I'm not angry, Michael. I'm simply done. Done pretending I'm fine when I'm not. Done being available for your convenience, but not worthy of your time. Done living in a house full of memories you couldn't be bothered to visit. I wish you and your family well. I hope your children grow up to show you more consideration than you've shown me. Please don't try to contact me. Mum. I read it 3 times, considered softening it, adding something about still loving him, about this not being about love. But it was about love. About the absence of it, about the difference between the word and the action. I sealed the envelope, addressed it to Michael's house, added a stamp. Then I walked downstairs to the building's mailbox and I dropped it in. The metal slot clanged shut, irreversible. I went back upstairs and I stood at my window, and I watched the sunset over the lake, turning the water from grey to silver to gold. My phone was still off, had been off for 3 weeks. I turned it on now just to see. 47 missed calls, 31 text messages, all from Michael. None from Melissa. None from Jake or Emma. I deleted them without reading. Then I blocked the number. The phone stayed on. I'd need it for other things, for Mrs. Chen, for doctor's appointments, for the new life I was building, one careful brick at a time. But not for Michael, not anymore. I learned in those first weeks in the apartment what silence without weight feels like. Mornings I made tea and watched the sunrise over the water. Some days it was spectacular, pink and orange and purple streaking across the sky. Some days it was just grey, fading to lighter grey. Both were enough. Mrs. Chen visited once a week. We'd have lunch at my small table, and she'd tell me about her garden, about the new people who'd bought my old house. About nothing important and everything essential. "Have you heard from him?" she asked once, just once. "No," I said. She nodded, didn't push. I joined a book club in the building, started walking along the lake path every morning as far as my healing body would allow. Made acquaintance with other residents, Anne from 215, who'd been a librarian, George from 408, who'd taught history, Patricia from the first floor, who'd buried 3 husbands and still found reasons to laugh. People with their own stories, their own silences. 2 months after I moved, Mrs. Chen called with news. "The house sold again," she said. "Your house." The young couple flipped it, fixed up the kitchen, added that deck they wanted, made a nice profit. "Good for them," I said. They painted over the marks in the hallway, the height marks. I was quiet for a moment. Good energy only lasts so long, I suppose. "Helen, it's fine," I said. And it was. They were never meant to last forever. Nothing is. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. "Michael came by the old house looking for you about 3 weeks ago. The new owners told him they didn't know where you'd gone. He looked upset," they said. I watched the light on the water, counted to 10. "Did he try to find you?" "No," Mrs. Chen said softly. "At least not that I know of." "Of course not. If you're reading this and you recognize something in these words, if you're the one who always says yes, who always makes it easy, who always pretends to be fine, I want you to know something. Your silence isn't kindness, it's abandonment. Of yourself. Your no isn't selfishness, it's a boundary, a reminder that you exist as a person, not as a function. And if they can't accept that, if your worth to them was only ever measured by what you could provide, then let them go. I did, and I learnt something in the letting go. Peace isn't the absence of loneliness, it's the presence of dignity, of choice, of mornings by the water that belong only to you. The lake is grey today, rain coming in from the west. I can see it crossing the water, a dark curtain moving closer. I'll make tea, I'll watch the storm, and when it passes the way storms always do, I'll still be here, just me. And that, finally, is enough.